Hello, everyone, and happy birthday to America. This is the LOOPcast special episode for our nation's birthday, July 4th. Happy July 4th, everyone. We are recording this one especially for this week where most people are going to be on vacation, driving, hopefully at a lake somewhere, sipping something cold, having a good time, enjoying our country. So,
maybe sipping some Sam Adams.
All right, we'll keep that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
So we brought together, my co-hosts here are wearing red. One of the things that we often get talked about is how much Josh knows. And Josh knows a lot, but Josh knows a lot specifically about American history, almost to the point where it's a little bit annoying. I don't know if you know any guys like that. Dominant trivia performer, will correct you on incorrect history takes. Really fun to instigate. So that just kind of started this conversation.
You say that.
What?
You say that.
Did you?
But I just took two of my boys to the Washington, D.C. and, patriotic thing. Did the whole. We had somebody give us a Capitol tour, and I was actually expounding more on the tour than she was. I'm like, hey, there's a reason why.
So you were trying to prove my point, right?
Yeah.
I'm like,
you're just proving my point.
She's there in the Capitol, and there's this like mock-up of the whole city, like all the buildings. And I go, well, the Washington Monument is the tallest building in D.C. You can't build a building taller than it. She goes, really? I go, yeah, that's why all the skyscrapers are in Northern Virginia, across the river in Rosalind. She's like, I didn't know that. I'm gonna have to tell everyone else that. It's not even that hard.
Josh didn't pay enough money for a tour guide that knew more than him, unfortunately. But so we're just gonna go over some good America questions here. I compiled a list, and I really want to test Josh's knowledge and Erica's knowledge. Erica, very sneaky, underrated trivia player as well, knows a lot about America. I can edit this, so that's my contribution. But we're gonna start with the founding, okay? So we're starting right at the top, founding of the country. Josh, to you, how did America, against all the odds, pull off the win in the Revolutionary War?
I mean, the funny answer is that Americans will wake up on Christmas morning, cross the frozen river, and kill you. That's basically what happened at the Battle of Trenton there. I mean, it doesn't hurt. The fact of the matter is, if you have a determined army, even if you're outgunned and outmanned, I mean, the whole thing is that if you look at the Revolutionary War, General Washington, he was doing his very best with underpaid or unpaid volunteers who didn't even have shoes, and they're walking through the snow in Pennsylvania. They're doing their best. I mean, a ragtag group. The French came in and helped us out. That was absolutely clutch move because they hated the British. That helped. We were defending our turf. Anytime you have people defending their own turf, they will fight harder and longer and more determined. And so that's why, if you look at Afghanistan, they took on, if you think about it, like they could be like, hey, we took a Soviet Union and the United States, and we're still rocking. We're 2-0. And it's like, I mean, the consolation of that is it's Afghanistan. But I mean, they gotta give them credit. They fought for their homeland. So that does a lot. Like, people want to fight to protect their own family. It's a lot harder to get someone to volunteer to fight a foreign war than it is right here in your homeland. So that's why we kept fighting. And it was it wasn't like victory after victory after victory. It was not getting eliminated, not getting totally burnt out and defeated. And it was a survival, and we did. And there's so many times you'll see George Washington talk about Providence, because there's all the troops we had, like in Brooklyn, and he was able to take all the guys and cross the river because the fog descended right at the right time, and the British had no idea, and they had some cannons set up and pretend like we're still there. And by the time the morning happens, it all clears, and the Yanks fought on. It was great.
I think I agree with you completely. I completely agree with you on the 30,000-foot view there, that like we're on the home soil fighting for our country. But at the same time, there were those moments like that, right? That sort of, the war, everything kind of was on a razor's edge. And another moment I think about that there was a lot of, call it providential happenstance there, but that moment when Benedict Arnold could have taken out George Washington at West Point there. They had the plans for the British to come up to West Point. George Washington would be there. They would, Benedict Arnold would let him in, and they would get him and end the war by taking out the head. And it was really a series of they just seemed like so random coincidences that the plot was discovered. Major Andre, who was the British guy working with Arnold, he's like walking. He made it back to British-held New York. He was up at West Point. He was a spy. He made it back to British-held New York and just happened to run into these 3 guys who pretended they were British infantrymen. They were actually Americans who had just escaped from a British prison ship, and they happened to be walking that way and thought this guy was fishy. And so, again, like all these little moments throughout the war where there was just, call it chance, call it providence, that went in the Americans' direction. And
can't you say two
cool.
questions then, especially we're going to test Josh here. So there were many times, you kind of mentioned it, where George Washington is credited with basically convincing men who were not getting paid, were not well clothed, to somehow just continue to believe in the vision for America, and are basically against any reason. And part of that was just his character, or his like what people thought of him. Like he was regarded as a man of a lot of respect. Is that correct?
No, it's absolutely true. I mean, yes, absolutely. And there's this time, like the soldiers had fought so long, so hard in Congress. We didn't have the government structure now that we did then, obviously, but in a more critical way. There was no way for the states. It was the Articles of Confederation. There was no real way that the states could assemble taxes, money, and pay for the troops. And so the troops were like, "What are we doing this for? This is terrible. Like, let's go. Let's storm the Capitol. We'll take out these members of Congress. We'll get the money we deserve." And the thing is, they all gathered at this, like, in this tavern, and they were like going to plot what they were going to do. And George Washington prevented it all. Like they're all getting stoked up. He comes in, he sits down, and he starts talking to the troops. And he gets a little choked up, and he says, "I want to read you this letter," where he has his thoughts gathered. And he's actually required. He goes, "Actually, I apologize." And he's having a hard time getting through reading his letter. And he stops and he pulls out his glasses, and he says, "In my old age, I have grown partially blind in service to my country." I'm not getting the exact words. And the thing is, and he reads this, and everyone, it's just like, in today's internet age, there was like mic drop, nailed it. I mean, you don't have any idea like how much of everyone in the room just does. Like they can't, like this guy is saying, "Yes, you were not treated justly. You haven't been compensated appropriately, but we're not going to have a military coup. You can't do this, And he understood his legacy very well. And he had so many critical points. There's no country without George Washington. And as you say, Erica, so much providence. So
that'll come back in this episode. But okay, 2 questions. As someone who's a fan of the movie The Patriot, I assume everyone in this room has seen this.
Yep,
okay,
good movie.
So questions that arise from is this Hollywood magic, or was there actually a seed of truth in this? So the guerrilla warfare element of it was really played up. And of course, like some of that is just like, okay, cool cinematography, some good special effects. Was guerrilla warfare used to the level that they were suggesting there? Like it was some novel tactic that George Washington had employed, or was it not as much in real life as the movie?
It's not just guerrilla warfare per se, but yeah, this, the idea was you would have in Europe, armies would, they'd come together and they get in the line, and then they would start firing, and, and they'd be replaced by other soldiers, and they would do that. Well, the Americans are like, well, wait a minute now. First of all, we don't have nearly as many troops. And it's like, you're living in the frontier, which is, what the United States was at that time. And you don't just come up to like 10 guys come up to a bunch of deer and go, "Okay, could you line up? We'd like to take you out." You go like, no, you kind of be quiet. You sit behind trees and, and that was not thought to be gentlemanly, but like it is more effective. And so Americans, adopted that strategy, and it was pretty much a survivalist, technique. I mean, there's no other opportunity. Like we're going up against the greatest world, the world power, the British Empire. So, yeah.
And I also don't think I've ever hated a movie villain more than the villain in The Patriot.
Yeah.
The English guy that kills the son.
And like burns down the church.
Yeah,
I was ready to go to war, man.
That's the part where it's like, that's total Hollywood fiction. I mean, the British just did not lock people inside of a church and burn people to death like that. I mean, that's obvious. Give me a break. That didn't happen. But there were atrocities, on both sides, of course. But I'm not saying like war is clean and perfect, but like I remember looking at that, I'm like, that can't be true, and there's no evidence to suggest anything like that ever happened. So.
Yeah, but not to make this all about the Patriot, but also the line, don't fire until you see the whites in their eyes, if you remember that as well. Like, they were running so low on ammo that they just had to conserve to the point, like, wait till they're right in your
John
face.
Paul Jones. I mean, that's what he says.
Yeah.
Don't fight to see the whites of the guys. I mean, think about a ship, how close you have to be to see someone's eyes like that.
Seriously. So we win the war. We're moving on. We win the war, but we have to now make a country, which was, Josh had kind of mentioned, structure of the country was much different before the war. As the war's going on, now it ends. We have to actually make a constitution. We try the Articles of Confederation. Didn't work out super well.
No.
So we have these men that we consider the founding fathers of America. Some very well noted: George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison. But there were a few others that people don't talk about often. So in your opinion, do you feel like any of them are misunderstood in some ways, or maybe their influence was larger than what the edit they received in history?
Well, I think, I'm appreciative of the miniseries that was done on John Adams, about 10, 15 years ago. Very well done, and appropriately so, because he was one of the great founding fathers that I thought for a long time didn't get enough recognition. Too many people thought maybe he's a little too religious, and he had a very controversial career. I mean, obviously, when he was in Boston and the Boston Tea Party, and he's defending, the legal rights of the British guys because everyone deserves a right trial. And like, whoa, what is this guy doing? And he really just believed in the principles of the rule of law, and he was an amazing man. And I thought that has been nice to see. The most underrated one would probably be Charles Carroll, and we as Catholics like to give him a shout out.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, he provided so much great intellectual heft to everything in terms of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, all that kind of stuff, because, in England, it was all the divine right of kings, and you're trying to think of what are the natural law principles here that aren't necessarily linked to, the divine right of kings. And Charles Carroll had access to all this stuff. He's Jesuit educated. He knew about these great thinkers. And he was like St. Robert Bellarmine. He was able to share a lot of that stuff, Montesquieu, with all these other founding fathers. And they're like, yeah, this is great stuff.
This makes sense.
And they incorporated it in so much of what they did. And, 200 years later, except for Catholics are like, hey, have you heard of this guy? Like, no one's heard of him. So he's probably the most underrated per se. Because the founding fathers would have thought, if you had 6 guys, he would have been one of the 6 you would have remembered. So he's most definitely, I would say, the most underrated.
As far as misunderstood goes, I mean, I got to go with Thomas Jefferson just for the phrase separation of church and state. It's got to be the most misunderstood phrase from the entire Revolutionary era.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go, although he's well known, Thomas Jefferson is much misunderstood, and we've talked about this on the pod.
Ad nauseum. We have, I think we have three or four clips of where's this from. It's from the letter to the Danbury Baptist.
Yeah.
How constitutionally binding this letter from a private citizen to a church in Danbury, Vermont is, like, or Connecticut, whatever, Virginia, I forget. Whatever. The point is, totally.
It just suffers. I think it suffers from having such a good name. Like, it's so catchy. It's so catchy, it doesn't make sense. Kind of like the "Don't Say Gay" thing. Like, the name is so good, it just surpasses what it actually is.
Yeah, the reason goes out the window. Like, if that's not the truth, I don't want to hear it.
Exactly.
Too good to fact check. Let's run with it. Thanks, guys.
All right,
Too good to fact check.
Before we move on, I have to ask this as well. This is a little controversial, I'm sure. The musical Hamilton?
Do you want me to wrap the whole thing? Because I
Please don't.
can't.
Thoughts
Here-
on
all right.
Hamilton? Good, bad, hate it.
I mean,
love
in
it.
general, I just
All
hate
right.
musicals. I've always hated musicals. I've only seen one in my life that I really liked, and that was Fiddler on the Roof. But other than that, I just in general hate.
That's
I
really
hate,
sweet.
I
That
hate
is sweet.
musicals, and my mom and I got absolutely diametrically opposed lessons from it. That'll be a story from another day. But I don't really, care for what Hamilton. I'm not going to watch this musical. I'm not against it, but whatever. But Hamilton,
All right.
Hamilton is awesome. The man.
Let Erica in. Let Erica in.
So
What's going on?
Hamilton was a staple of my 3 older daughters' education. And yes, I did let them listen to it, swear words and all. We had a rule, though. So the rule was you could watch the first act of Hamilton, and then once you were old enough and you could read the entire Miracle at Philadelphia, which is this long historical tome account of the framing of the Constitution, I would allow you to watch the second act of Hamilton, which is about that. But I have a theory that all American musicals are just expressions of the Nietzschean will to power and the whole my truth, your truth. So they're all corrupt, except Hamilton. I'm going to go with Hamilton is the exception, and I really enjoyed it. I think, yes, there's a lot of woke going on, etc. But I am a fan of Hamilton.
You're saying it's got some redeeming qualities.
Now my daughters tell me it's cringe because
I'm gonna have
it's
to
old
disagree
and it's
on that
cringe
one.
now. But I liked it because I'm old. I liked Hamilton.
And cringe?
It's cringe. That's okay. It's I don't mind being cringe.
Okay. We moved past Hamilton. I figured I had to throw that one in there.
Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Okay.
May he be converted. Amen.
Yeah, seriously. So, most underrated presidents.
Oh boy.
Josh.
I think we should give appropriate credit to President Ulysses S. Grant.
You took mine. Oh. Okay.
He wasn't good.
Grant. I have one more.
He bought too much into the era of the time in terms of his Catholicism. He did too much on the Blaine Amendments, that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to excuse that. But a lot of the post war healing of the country, he had fought long and hard to make sure that to try to get the South back in line and back in the Union. And the South hates him for it, and they sullied his name for generations. But he did a lot for the country, and he won the war. I mean, there's no question.
You know who was instrumental in that? Robert E. Lee.
Instrumental in what? Oh,
in the Southern Divide.
Yeah, I don't know if
Robert E. Lee surrendered way before he could. He could have prolonged it, made it bloody, gone guerrilla warfare, but he actually surrendered, and he was given a place of. He and his soldiers were given. They weren't tortured or enslaved because they came back on good terms because of how Robert E. Lee resigned.
Well, I mean, the thing is,
we might disagree on
that. Grant, was after he won the Battle of Vicksburg, he allowed the South, the soldiers there, and it wasn't this idea of unconditional surrender always. He's he modifies it. He's like, look, you can keep your sidearm. You can keep, you can't keep your slaves, but you can keep, your property. We're not going to take all your stuff. We're not going to, you can continue, and we need to live together. And then Union soldiers started providing food for these Confederates who were starving, because it's we were shooting at each other a few days ago. We're still Americans.
Brothers.
That was the whole point. Yeah, we're brothers. So I think Grant is definitely an underrated one. I mean, the thing is, there's a lot of conservatives today, fast forward to the 20th century, a lot of conservatives today were like, Eisenhower, he should have done more to, repeal the, FDR's New Deal expansionism. I mean, sure, that would have been great. But in general, you had a period where, so much, with Roosevelt controlling so many sectors of the economy, and then Truman coming in, and he tried to nationalize healthcare, ultimately failed. But Eisenhower gets in there, and he's like, I don't know if we're not really going to be able to repeal everything that happened over the last 20 years in terms of massive big government stuff, but at least let's kind of chill out a little bit and not try to choke the rest of the economy. So
yeah, anyone who walks back presidential power a little bit or cedes some of it back to Congress, I'm a fan of. Yeah, my other underrated president, since Josh stole my Ulysses S. Grant, that's okay. I'll give it to you, Josh. I'm gonna go with James Polk.
Oh,
So
gosh, you took mine.
Because
I have so many notes on him, too.
Okay, so did I take yours? Oh my gosh. See,
Yeah,
we're
go
just
on.
like jiving here. Okay, so I'm a real fan because Texas. And while I have no ambitions to live in Texas ever, I'm definitely a New England girl. Where would we be without Texas? I mean, he won us the Mexican War. He got us Oregon, which again, you could take it or leave it, but we would be a much different country without Oregon. And yeah, he had a lot of problems as well. Not a perfect guy. Kind of left the Native Americans to their fate. He wasn't wholly responsible for what was happening to them, but he definitely didn't intervene at all.
Big manifest destiny guy.
Yeah, big manifest destiny guy, and he got us Texas, so definitely underrated.
Yeah, and well, I guess theoretically won the Mexican-American War?
Mexican War, yep.
Yeah.
Yep, technically. Commander-in-Chief and all that.
He also noted he promised to only run for one term, and he said he was only going to do one term. I'm going to go do this term, and I'm going to make it happen, and then he got out of there and was true to his word, didn't do another term.
I respect that.
And he also started the U.S. Naval Academy and the Smithsonian, fun facts. And what you were talking about over Oregon County, he avoided a war with Great Britain, which neither country really wanted or could really even handle at the time.
Could afford,
he was the 11th president. I just have to get these facts out of the hopper because I did do research, and
do it,
I'm
Tom.
a little bit disappointed that
fun facts with Tom.
if you like Tex-Mex, like he's responsible. Thank you, James Polk, former governor of Tennessee. I'm trying to think. I looked at a list of other underrateds. I was going to bring up Eisenhower as well, but
well, you know who's underrated in a kind of in a bad way, but okay, so Jimmy Carter, who I mostly detest.
That's interesting. Hot take.
I saw him on some lists.
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing. Like, in terms of implementing his own agenda, like the guy was only in for one term, right? He didn't have any picks on the Supreme Court, right? But he has a massively controlled Democratic Congress, and he's able to get through a law passed that expanded the judiciary in a significant way. And basically, he put in dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of federal judges who gummed up the works for 15, 20 years. And all these things, you know, so Reagan's president for 2 terms and George H. Bush for another. So we had 12-year run Republican presidents, but Carter, you know, picks to the judiciary just stymied so many efforts of conservatives to try to bring, you know, restore some sort of semblance to American life. And, you know, we fight that to this day, judges. Like even judges, I like, you know, judges that Trump picks to the Supreme Court. He had 3 of them. But to the federal judiciary, there's, you know, Vox was just writing about this recently about how several Trump appointment judges have not done the right thing on the trans issue. And so, you know, it's a fight. You know, it's always a fight. And these judges feel like they get in there, they can do whatever they want. We got a lot of reform of our judiciary left to go.
Yeah, if I could leave it at this, I think Richard Nixon actually is very underrated in that all that ever gets talked about is Watergate. And also he was kind of an awkward. He wasn't you know, a John F. Kennedy type charismatic. He was a little bit awkward, definitely a political wonk.
Not easy on the eyes.
Not easy on the, not a good looking dude.
No.
James Polk, good. He had sick flow, by the way. Go look up a picture of James Polk.
Well,
he's
Nixon totally understood.
He had sick flow.
Okay, guys.
All right, yeah, go ahead.
Nixon totally understood, like, the most important thing over the next 50 to 70 years was going to be China. Like, give him credit for that. Now, whether that experiment worked or not, but to have that, I'm not saying I endorsed it, but like that massively consequential world history moment where he tries to think, let's try to open up China. And the hope was, of course, and successively with, you know, the trade agreements in the 90s and up into 2000 World Trade Organization, the hope was that as China became more modern, more market-oriented, that they would have more freedom. Unfortunately, they sort of hijacked that and they become this hybrid fascist system where they use the money from, you know, capitalism to promote, you know, their system, which is a violation of human rights. So I'm not putting that all on Nixon. I'm certainly not putting all of it on Clinton and Bush and everyone else on the trade agreements. But that's going to still be a big problem for all the 21st century. And so that's something that, remains a perplexing problem for us to this day.
For sure. Okay. Most overrated presidents.
Oh, FDR all the way.
No.
That was on my list as well.
Absolutely.
No,
He's
you're wrong.
overrated.
You're both wrong. I
People
mean, he's horrible. He's not overrated. Like, Barack Obama is overrated. Like, people say, like, you get the top 10 list of greatest presidents, and sometimes it's just, you've got
Did you go to like a classical Catholic school?
No.
My high school, every history teacher I had
They all
and my
fawn
American
over
Gov,
FDR,
they
yeah.
fawned over FDR. They're
Of
like,
course
he
they
was
love
the
him.
savior of the country.
Yeah, no.
But he
I mean,
wasn't, Josh,
okay,
so why would you
of
say
course
he's
not.
not
I think FDR
overrated?
was terrible for this country. But, like, the fact is, FDR was a political genius, like, generational figure. You get these people who are just like masterminds. He understood exactly what he was doing. He was trying to bring socialism to his country. And so he was unfortunately, wildly successful.
Well, so in terms
so,
of
like,
expediency,
Yeah, so
in
you're
terms
talking
of
about a different
political
metric.
expediency, my metric is people think he was this great savior of the United States and the world and solved the Great Depression globally and won World War II. But that's not actually what happened. But what you're saying is, and I agree with you here, in terms of political expediency, knowing what he wanted and how to get it, absolutely, he did it.
Yeah,
it was deliberate.
Certainly one
it
of
was
the
all
most successful
deliberate.
Good to
presidents,
clarify.
even if he was horrible, for people who love freedom. Yeah, no question about that.
Mhm.
I mean, and sometimes you get this thing where people, most of the history professors that do these presidential rankings are all liberal. And so you get, Barack Obama, FDR, they love these guys. And, even Johnson doesn't fare too bad. Johnson is horrendous. Like, ultimate, like, well, let's just
Awful.
war, lovely, I love it. War, spend money, spend money till, like there's no tomorrow.
Export
the guy was horrible.
abortion, export population control. Yeah.
Well,
he
Nixon was bad
great.
on that
Mhm.
too. I mean, the thing is, though, like these lists just sort of drive me crazy, because what it's all just kind of baloney and it's very slanted. Like, you should be able to kind of look at it and say, even though I don't like what this person's agenda was, this person was effective. He did do things that helped the country, and I mean,
But Josh, we're not going to talk about FDR's putting Japanese Americans into internment camps. We're not going to talk about the
Tennessee
relationship with
Valley
Russia.
Authority flooding out all the black sharecroppers who were
Where
not
he's
compensated.
also
Hey.
very partially responsible for the Cold War
Mhm.
as well. So you
I
can
hate
talk all
him.
you want
I
about
hate
him
him all
bringing
I want,
socialists here. But
Yalta,
Yeah.
terrible.
I think
Okay.
I grew up when I was in high school or whatever, FDR was fawned over ad nauseum for bringing us out of the Great Depression. Yada,
The
yada,
question is,
yada. So
do
I
they
think,
even do that anymore?
I
I
don't
don't
know.
even know how effective they teach education, history.
I know. Do kids
in,
even know who he is
government
anymore?
schools
Probably
anymore.
not. But
I don't
Josh,
know.
who's yours? So Josh, on your metric, who's
Obama's
the
a
most
good pick.
overrated?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
Obama's
it's Barack
obvious.
Obama. I mean, he did
Yeah.
get it. For them, it's like he got the gold, he finally captured the golden goose. He was able to get government control of healthcare. So they'll never stop fawning over him for that.
And
I think his-
Obergefell.
I
He
think
got
his-
Obergefell.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
his long-lasting thing will be that he really entered into this class war, racial warfare stuff. The CRT and all that other kind of stuff. Realizing that Americans aren't going to go for sort of a socialist Marxist argument on class warfare, then let's use, CRT, critical race theory, all this stuff to try to convert Americans into believing nonsense and hating their own country and hating their own history. Barack Obama was the absolute champion of that, and Biden has carried that to the next level, of course. I always say this: Americans are the only people who are expected to hate their own country. I think it's so bizarre. Why can't we love it?
Yeah. Something to be said about that, though, and I think people have made interesting arguments to and for that Biden is almost somewhat of an extension of the Obama presidency.
Yeah, it's his third
because
term.
Oh,
for sure.
100%.
The way that people look at Obama's presidency with, rose-colored lenses, I think they look at Biden and still are a little bit embarrassed. Not in the same way, like in terms of legislation and tactics and stuff, I think could be critical of the same things that Biden and Obama are doing very similar things, but people just fawned over, Obama because he wore tan suits and was a good speaker. But now you look at Biden, he's fallen over at the Air Force Academy, can barely get 2 words together like that.
Yeah, but when Jerry
I think
Ford did that, the liberal media went crazy. So it's like, oh, hypocrites. Yeah, of course.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Very true. So that's a solid pick. Wait, Erica, did you put yours in? We said FDR.
I said
FDR is a good
FDR,
pick.
and Josh just like boom, right in there with his tank.
I mean,
Hey, it's fair. Josh is
good.
a steel trap.
It forced us to clarify and to define our terms, which is always a good
Always
thing.
important. Always
Yeah.
important. So, okay, next question. What is something that modern Americans have come to expect from their government that the founding fathers and early Americans would be shocked at?
I mean, I think government running the federal government being involved in education would have absolutely blown them out of the water. The fact that, if you just explain to someone like Thomas Jefferson, hey, here's the deal. Guess what? When you come to the 21st century, you're going to be blown out of the water by these cell phones where you can do all this cool stuff. Then he'll love the tech and he'll be like, oh, that's so cool. And I go, and let me show you this video where the secretary or the attorney general of the United States is running the Justice Department is going to go after parents who show up at school board meetings. And he'll be like, wait, what? Yeah, the federal Department of Education, you'd be like, wait, what? The department, he would just be blown out of the water that the attorney general would target parents as terrorists because they're upset with federal officials insisting that, you do all this kind of CRT and trans stuff. He would be like,
what happened,
maybe I
guys?
need to send a letter to King George and apologize.
Sorry, George. Yeah, I was going to say just federal overreach in general, that we see the federal government in so many areas of our lives, and the healthcare. I was going to go with education too. And just the tax rates, like the percentage of our income that goes to city, state, federal taxes, and what they were rebelling over in terms
Sales,
of what
property,
sales,
yeah,
property, and
just...
yeah, I think they would also be shocked to visit our historical towns and to see the rules that homeowners in the historic districts have to follow just to maintain that colonial feel when you walk through Mystic, Connecticut. They'd be like, wait, you can't paint your front door? You have 3 colors? I think they'd be shocked at how reverent we are, especially here in New England with our historical homes. But,
yeah, I mean, I would think twerking would be higher on the list than that. But
okay, we went there. He totally went
this
there.
This is the America episode.
Yes.
We need to keep that out of here. So mine would be I think they'd be really shocked by the military-industrial complex and the Second Amendment. What the Second Amendment means now that we have modern weaponry, and just how powerful the American military has become, or just the idea that it's even like a full-time job of some kind. Like there's, people that serve in the military, it makes their career.
Standing army,
just because they were towns of militias basically, and they're like, all right, we'll all get together when we need to go, I don't know, fend off the British, but with our muskets and whatever. But now we're seeing, tanks and F-16s, and that would just be,
if they saw,
obviously
I agree with you. If
technology.
they saw a standing army, of all the military members, you couldn't tell what country they were from. And they go, look at all these planes, these warships, these tanks. Look at all these different countries. You show on the map all the different places where the U.S. military is, and you go, and what country has this? And they're like, wow, the British Empire is that many places. Like, yeah, no, dog, that's actually
that's America.
That's the U.S. of A.
That's
there.
America.
They would be shocked.
I think
I would totally be shocked by that.
Pretty surprising. And then I think Josh likes to talk about this often, but the power of the judicial branch, I don't think they would have ever foreseen.
Yeah.
They never thought of it as 3 co-equal. That
right.
is another, communist myth of 20th century government education. They did not think of them as co-equal. They always thought it was a fight in the founding fathers. Some who thought the legislative branch was supreme, and others who thought the executive needed to be the most powerful. That'd be like the Hamilton branch. But none of them were like, oh yeah, let's just have these unelected guys in robes and they'd be in control of everything forever. Yeah, let's do that. No.
Total shock.
And a lot of the judicial powers were basically granted to themselves by, it was like Marbury v. Madison, I think, was kind of, a lot of people
the whole
credit that
idea
as
of
the start
judicial
of,
review, it was.
Yeah. Interesting, but I think that would just be like, what is going on for early
the idea
Americans?
that only they would also say the idea that only the judiciary has a way of checking the the powers of the other one, like they're the final arbiter. It's as if we the
that they're
people
the
through our
final
elected
say.
through our elected representatives don't have that ability. Give me a break. We all do. It's not like it's the judges and they are control of the Constitution. It's our Constitution. We have a right to interpret it and defend it. Like, give me a break.
Yeah. So speaking of interpretation, so if you were given a magical power right now to create a constitutional amendment, what would it be?
Well, inspired by President Joe Biden, who turned 80 in November. I do wonder if it's time to have an 80 is enough amendment, so that anyone who is 80 years old can no longer serve in office. It would be a maximum age requirement. Maybe we grandfather in everybody, okay, so that Joe Biden, yes, if he wants to run for another, if we put this in right today, Joe Biden would still be able to run for another term because it would have been passed after he got first elected. And why do I say that? So that Clarence Thomas and Sam Alito and all these other guys can stay till they're past 80. But the idea is we should probably no longer have, so many people in office. I mean, like Chuck Grassley's a good senator from Iowa. I like him a lot. I like his voting record. But dude, the guy's like 88 years old. Feinstein is like 88 years old. It's time for some other people here. Like, it would be nice to get rid of this. Like the founding fathers would be stunned. Like that, Chuck Grassley, oh, you're going to run for re-election at 88 years old? Like, really? Like, look at the founding fathers. These guys were young. Like, this idea that they were all, they were not like in their 70s. Like, James Madison, like 25, 27 years old or whatever. They're all young guys.
Because if you see pictures of, or obviously paintings of a lot of the early founding fathers, it always makes them look older and more distinguished. So you think of them as these kind of
wigs
old
on.
men
they
who got together to
clothes
and wisdom. Like, these are young guys. Like, a lot of them were like 30s.
Yeah.
I think Benjamin Franklin was the oldest.
Yeah, it was in
the
the 60s. Yeah, but so many of them were much younger. Right.
They just didn't expect us to be living that long. Like,
so
nobody
if we
really
can have a
had
minimum
that
age
as a
requirement,
thing.
you have to be 25 in the House, 30 in the Senate, 35 to be president. Why can't you have a maximum age?
Mm-hmm. I'll go for that amendment. I'm good with that.
Erica?
Yeah, well, I'm going to go with, since I don't think the 14th Amendment is clear enough, I would alter it to include persons born and unborn, granting personhood to the unborn would be top of my list. A federal amendment, a constitutional amendment defining marriage between a man and a woman. Don't think that's going to happen, but I think I'd go with the unborn. I also like the age limits. All of these seem like really good ideas.
I mean, the age limit actually has the opportunity to actually pass. I mean, like after Biden's done, we could say to people, hey, is this really a good idea?
This isn't good. Yeah.
And that's why I say to people, it's like, Donald Trump and Joe Biden, 70% of the American people don't want either of these guys to run again. And there's a good chance that they'll actually both win their party's nominations. And it's like, is it maybe time for the boomers and actually Biden's silent generation? Is it time for them to leave the scene here and maybe start, the next generation to have a chance to govern?
Mm-hmm.
Might make sense.
Yep.
I agree. Mine would be, I think that we need a larger House of Representatives because
I totally agree.
That's
really interesting.
Going back to what the founding fathers believed as well, like they believed that, I mean, there's this big argument, of course, in how we end up with this bicameral legislation or legislature is that some people were like, well, we just want 2 per state. And then other people are like, well, then the big states are going to get advantages over us. Or I'm sorry, it is the little states will govern. So it'd be the little states wouldn't have as many representatives. And so that's how they came up with the Senate having 2 for each state, so that equal representation. And I think now, like the population, I don't think the founding fathers could have ever imagined the population would have ever been this big and that the numbers of representatives wouldn't have climbed with those people. So we have people that represent us that we never see. Like you would never see them in the grocery store. You wouldn't recognize them if they walked by you.
They're representing millions and millions of people.
Way too many people. So
it's almost a million. It's like 900,000. I know what you mean. I agree, though. Yeah, I mean, this is actually, by the way, this is a little trivia for you. You keep talking about the trivia thing. This is the one time George Washington decided to chime in on the Constitutional Convention to hold debate. Because they're like, should we do like 40,000 people per representative or 30,000? He's like, 30,000. I don't know if the number's right, but he wanted the lower amount.
The lower number,
less,
right?
He wanted less he want that more representatives. He wanted to be much, bigger. So that was, and people were like, sounds good, George. And so the thing is, we're stuck at 435 because that was the last time, basically increased in the 1911, and it's never increased in size. And people are like, well, we hate Congress. Why would you want more people of them? You're not getting it. They're more insulated the smaller number you have. I mean, like if you had only 20, or obviously you couldn't need 50 states, but let's say you only had one per state, like that's not better. If you have a greater size, I would have it at like at least 2,000. That way you would have a much better chance of being able to actually know who your representative is and have a chance to meet them, as you say, and encounter them.
You'd have greater influence. Well, you'd have greater influence over who gets put in as well, too, if there's less people.
Right.
So I think it's time to right the ship on that. 1911, that's way too long ago.
That's way too long.
I mean, come on, guys. It's 2023. What are we doing? Okay, so this one, I'm going to title this section just kind of America questions that maybe get misunderstood or people always think it's better elsewhere. And the biggest one that always comes up is, why do we have a two-party system? We started with a two-party system. We still have a two-party system. Other places have parliamentary systems. That may seem kind of sexy to Americans who are frustrated with their current system. Why do we have a two-party system? And what is the pros and cons relative to those parliamentary systems?
Yeah, I mean, the parliamentary system seems very interesting to a lot of Americans right now, precisely because we're so very polarized and there's not a lot of people who cross party lines. In fact, it's so hard for people to believe that there are people who would vote for a Republican Senate candidate and a Democratic presidential candidate. They're like, can't happen, can't be true. And it is true. It is true. There were people in the Atlanta suburbs who voted Republican for Senate and they voted for Biden for president. And that's how we ended up the way it was, because Georgia is very closely divided. So the thought would be a parliamentary system is much more efficient in a sense, and it's more integrated from top to bottom. Like you vote your region, you vote for your candidate in your party, and then the prime minister of the country is the leader of the largest party usually, or whatever the coalition is. So you would make it's an intriguing idea for Americans. I understand that. Now, George Washington didn't want to have a two-party system. He didn't want to have established parties. He wanted all people to be sort of elected the way he was, or everyone's like, you're just the best dude, obviously. Well, I'm sorry, George. It's not going to happen that way. How do you get a two-party system? It's very simple. We have a system in most parts of this country where it's first past the post. Okay, if you think of like a horse race, like the first one to get, ding, you win. What does that mean? It means whoever gets the most number of votes wins. So if you have 5 people running, 4 people running, 3 people running, whatever, whoever gets the most wins. Well, then what tends to happen over time is that you end up with coalitions. So basically, the Democratic Party is a coalition of lots of different types of voters, and the Republican Party is a coalition of lots of different voters, and you end up with just 2 parties because all the incentives punish you for having third parties precisely because of this. Now, you can do it a different way. I mean, you don't have to have 2 parties, but why is it that we have 2 parties? It's because whoever gets the most votes wins. And even in states like the South or Georgia, Louisiana, they have a little bit of a tweak on it where it's like you actually have to have a majority of the votes. You can't just have like 47%, this other guy get 45, and this guy gets 7.
And that's why we have runoffs.
They have a runoff in those states. And the reason that they have that is because they were actually a one-party state for a long time. There was only Democrats for 70 years. And so if you only have Democrats, like, well, you got to figure out a way one of them's going to win. And you don't want to have 7 Democrats splinter the vote and some guy win with 20%. So that's why you run off the top 2. That's why they did that. But for the most part, that's sort of an anomaly. Most parts of this country, first past the post, that's going to give you 2 parties. Why is that a good thing? I think it is. James Madison understood this. You create parties which they're not necessarily monolithic. They're intended to be coalitions. So Republicans, you've got pro-lifers, you've got guys who love their Second Amendment right to guns. You've got people who...
Chris Christie.
Supposedly. You have people who like, taxes to be low. People who think we shouldn't, surrender ourselves to the green mob, who should actually have energy. And then the left is, a total basket case coalition of people who, want to
Call
kill
him out, Josh.
babies and, you know.
Party of death.
Call him out.
I'm with that.
And also some other things, right?
So,
I mean, that's why we
what's
have
the
that
advantage?
system.
Right
Well,
now, what's the advantage to that?
The
As
advantage,
opposed to the parliamentary.
the advantage to that is that it creates parties and it creates candidates who understand that they have to, you know, try to win a coalition. So
they have to answer to a lot of factions.
And what happens if you have two-party system, then that the candidates will always try. I mean, they, you know, the rap on the system that people have is that there's not a dime worth of difference between the Democrats and Republicans. I don't believe that at all, obviously, but it is the case that they're trying to appeal to the median voter, the person who's in the middle, the person that will give them that 51%, and so they have to do that without alienating their coalition. So, you know, they find the ways to make sure, so if you're a Republican candidate, you make sure that your pro-lifers are happy, that the people who support the Second Amendment are happy. I'll cut taxes. Okay, I'm against that regulation. I'm with you. But then they got to find a way to get the people in the middle saying, hey, what about, I'm in favor of, let's say, you know, whatever policy, like more cleaning up the environment, you know, whatever it can to try to win that middle voter. And so it creates a system where the candidates and the parties are trying to appeal to 51%. So it's a good system. I like it. I mean, is it perfect? Of course not. And it's like Winston Churchill said about democracy, it's the worst system except for everything else.
Yep. Except for all the others.
That's awesome. So speaking of decisions, what, in your opinion, was America's best decision over its lifetime? And we'll start with Erica.
I'm gonna go with just getting started. I think that the founding was the best, one of the best moments in America's life. This sounds so corny, but I do think the understanding that the founding fathers brought, and you know, people debate, was it a Christian founding? Was it inimical to Christianity? Were they all just deists? But what the founding fathers brought to it, including the contributions from Catholic natural law thought that Josh was just discussing from Carol, that, you know, men are sinful, right? We tend to destroy, we tend to tear apart, we tend to fail in our experiments, which leads to tyranny. And I think that conviction forced them to put into place protections that we still appreciate today, the checks and balances, the three branches of government. And again, just to echo Winston Churchill, it's the worst system except for all the others. And I think that because of that start, because of those convictions from the beginning, the experiment has lasted this long. How much longer we can talk about? It's going to keep going, but it was a good start. It was a good good decision.
You know, it would be nice, though, you know, President Trump started this thing, you know, to begin the preparations for the celebration of America's 250th, which will be coming up, obviously, in 2026. And, you know, one of the thoughts I had, I thought would be kind of neat, because we had this, you know, it was a debate and discussion whether or not we should kick Andrew. First of all, should we kick Alexander Hamilton off the $10 bill? Like, no, don't do that. And then should we kick Andy Jackson off? And no, I don't think they should have done that either necessarily. But I don't want to get too much into who's on the front necessarily of the bill. What if on the back of our bills, instead of having, like, you know, the White House
Masonic
in the back,
pyramid.
we have
the White House. Okay.
Yeah, the eye of all seeing
eye
eye.
of-
I'm not even going to get into the
All-seeing
Mason stuff.
Okay.
What if on the back of our bills, we, you know, because like if you look at the $2 bill, it's awesome. It's the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Like, we should have scenes like that on on the backs of other bills, right? Wouldn't that be neat? Like, what if on the back of the $20 bill, it's, you know, man landing on the moon? What if on the back
cool.
of the $10 bill, it's, you know, the boys at Kitty Hawk, you know, flying the first airplane? You know, what if it's Iwo Jima on the $1 bill or something?
Iwo
like
Jima
that?
would be sick.
Yeah,
That would be
I would
sick.
totally go.
Or
with
maybe
that.
you say Washington crossing the Delaware for the back of the one, and you put Iwo Jima on, like, you know, the 10 or something like that. These would be great. Like, that would be a great way to show history and educate people rather than just, here's about the White House on the, you know, it doesn't make any sense. So I think
like
that
that
would be
idea.
great. I would.
That could be a good future idea.
That's a good future decision.
Because
that
this
the
is
Treasury could make,
America's
or
was the
Mint
best
or
decisions
whoever.
made so far. So that could be the future.
That's what I'm saying. You've got a 250th anniversary coming up. This would be a great idea. Free idea for someone out there in Congress.
I have one that I'm glad they didn't do. I know that Alexander Hamilton suggested lifetime appointments for officials. I'm glad that didn't happen. That got shot down pretty quick, in fairness, by all the by the homies. They're like, no,
we have lifetime appointments
out
for
of
the
that.
Supreme
No.
Court. We have lifetime appointments for the Supreme Court, and of course the most important fourth branch of government, our bureaucracy. They stand there forever.
That's true. But I'm glad that we didn't have lifetime presidents for sure. But I think to Erica's point, mine was the decision for separation of powers. I think there's a inborn tendency for pessimism in terms of looking at human nature as flawed and needing things to be put in place to try to mitigate the effects of that flawed nature. And I think that was one of the first governments. So, I mean, it's a grand experiment. America's this grand experiment still going on. But many monarchies have been set up with thinking that royal blood was the greatest thing ever and was going to prevent all of these evils from happening. It was going to be the best thing ever. And it wasn't. So I think the grand experiment of separation of powers, viewing us as flawed, but a republic, as long as we can keep it, as long as we have the virtue to keep it, I think was a really
great quote.
Amen to that,
decision.
brother.
So, okay. Best presidential speech.
Oh.
It's not even a contest.
No.
Gettysburg
Address. Yeah.
Oh, actually, I saw some lists, and one did come above that. Do you have any guesses?
Second inaugural?
Somebody pretended that there was one better than that one. I mean, George Washington's farewell address.
George Washington's farewell address,
yeah.
correct.
Yeah.
No,
Farewell
because in all
awesome.
respect to George,
G-Dub.
He is, I mean, he's the greatest. I mean, he's awesome.
So, okay.
But
so then
that doesn't mean his speech is
said
the
it.
best.
Relevance to that.
It didn't. That doesn't mean his speech is the best. Literally,
Go for it.
The
I have a quote.
The thing, the story behind the Gettysburg Address too. I mean, like the original draft someone gave him, and you can see the edits he makes, and it's just so beautiful. I mean, like it is just amazing. And like he was not the big event of that day, by the way. It was some preacher. I forget the guy's name, and that guy talked for 3 hours, and everyone's like, "Ooh, this guy's amazing. This guy's good." And Lincoln gets up there, and he's like, "Brr, brr, 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 brr," real quick, short, sweet, few minutes, and it was just like, wow. I mean, it's so beautiful. The words he uses, the economy, everything about it, poetic. It's one of the greatest. It's one of the greatest speeches
the
ever.
Message. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, you're entitled to that opinion.
It's like Pericles' funeral oration. It's up there with the classics. It's amazing.
Yeah.
I have George Washington farewell address. I think I just. So, okay, of course, I got to give, Gettysburg Addresses due. But I think when reading through the Washington's farewell address, his characteristic humility is so apparent in his word choice and his sentence structure. Like, I was even reading it, and I just couldn't help but kind of, like, smile a little bit. I'm like, man, this is just so on brand for George Washington. So I have
People
a quote
should
from
read
it.
People should read his farewell address.
Tom's going to read it.
I'm
ready?
Awesome. I got a quote. So... Though in reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error, I am nevertheless too sensible of my defects not to think it profitable that I may have committed many errors. Whatever they may be, I fervently beseech the Almighty to avert or mitigate the evils which they are. I shall also carry with me the hope that my country will never cease to view them with indulgence, and that after 45 years of my life dedicated to its service with upright zeal, the faults of incompetent abilities will be consigned into oblivion, and as myself must soon be to the mansions of rest.
That's so beautiful.
King.
So another farewell address that's amazing is Eisenhower's.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had that up there too with the military-industrial complex. That was great.
Yeah.
But then I also had the follow-up. Kennedy's inaugural address was actually on a lot of lists, which is the classic.
Whatever.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
I'm sure Kennedy contributed to that, but the
Kennedy,
fact that
I should have said for overrated.
wrote his
My
own.
goodness.
Talk about overrated. We
What did he
agree on
do?
that one, Josh. He
got
assassinated.
assassinated.
Young.
For taking on the deep state. But,
He had an affair, wow.
That was not good.
He resisted CIA. All right, we can.
Wow.
Erica, what were we going to say?
Okay, moving on. No, I was remembering. I had a little nostalgia for Obama's farewell address, which I remember listening to it. I don't know why I listened to it. I think I was bored. But I listened to Obama's farewell address, and then I went and read Washington's farewell address. And the contrast was just unbelievable. So if you wanted a contrast in what we would say political humility with political hubris, you could just line those suckers up right next to each other. And
Yeah, go get a glass
judge
of
for
whiskey.
yourself. Judge for yourself.
Go through the address. Go through George Washington's address. It'll make you feel hope for the country.
Yeah. But hands down, Gettysburg. Going with Gettysburg.
I also had, well, this wasn't a presidential address, but the Man in the Arena speech by Theodore Roosevelt fires me up so much.
I love that.
Big stick.
Was he president when he gave that? I don't think so, right?
I have to look it up.
It wasn't an address, technically. Yeah. But I mean, come on now.
I want to look
Man
it up
in the Arena.
now.
Can't judge from the outside. Man in the Arena.
I love that.
Okay. So, most unique thing about America relative to the rest of the world.
I thought about this one, and I'm going to go with the fact that the rest of the world all wants to move here, right? Like, that's totally
a great point.
unique. We've got some rich white guys who are like, oh, Switzerland, Sweden, Scandinavia, I want to move there. But the vast majority of human beings want to come to America, even today, even with all of our issues that, we spend a lot of time here on the podcast decrying. But it's still the number one destination where you want to raise your kids. So that's unique.
Yeah. And, it's interesting, too, because, like, I had a friend who had dual citizenship with, he was an Irish citizen as well as an American citizen. And he loved to go up to other people and put them on the spot. Americans who were just grew up in their country. They love their country, which is good, of course, but like couldn't really understand or defend what it's about. And he'd go, what is really authentically American? And he just sort of like Mel Gibson hated everything associated with the British. And so people just were caught flat-footed and they didn't know how to respond. He goes, truly, tell me something that is authentically American. I mean, you could say it about Ireland. You could say it about Italy, France. People understand what is authentically French. What is it authentically American? And he would just and people come up and he just cut through them like a buzzsaw. But then he ran into this guy. I'm like, what? What are you talking
and then
about?
Mercer.
I said, baseball, Western, jazz. Have you ever heard of our music, country music? I mean, there's lots of things. Bourbon. Hello. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's authentically American.
The silver screen?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not bragging about Hollywood these days, but
not about what it is today. But that was at the time.
Yeah, I mean, like in
America.
and I just said like a few minutes ago, Kitty Hawk and landing on the moon. Hello, like we've done a few things for people. Like, give me a break. So it is kind of like he was trying to get at something, and I appreciate this actually. He was trying to get at like we have this, we like to say as American as an apple pie. Well, it's also American in a way is like cookie cutter homes and McMansions and like towns that are completely isolated. There's you have to drive everywhere, and we have government education, and every mall in every city looks the same, and like everything is commodified.
Home Depot,
and big box stores,
Walmart.
And it can that kind of materialistic life can just leave you so wanting for deeper meaning. And so in that sense, I knew what he was getting at, and I understood and appreciated that. And I do wish the people in our country would have a little bit more understanding of, the important things, the permanent things, family, church and local community. That obviously matters more.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We also, I feel like in America, we have this kind of embarrassment of wealth. It reminds me of how, if you guys are sports people, how the Lakers like somehow always manage to get coverage. Like even if they're terrible or they're not that good.
Oh, it's the Notre Dame
they're always
phenomenon.
being talked about in ESPN. Yeah, right. Like they're always being talked about because they're the Lakers. Like
just
that's kind of like
Yankees
America right now.
Notre Dame
It's just like
team,
right. Like people will always find critiques of America because it's America. Like it's in the position it's in. It's got this embarrassment of wealth, embarrassment of success that now it's like, okay, well, the only cool thing to do now is kind of it's not an underdog story anymore. It's like they're at the top, so you got to critique them. And so it's kind of become, I don't know, popular to just critique all the evils and bads of America. And part of that is, the Marxism that I think has kind of crept in. But I really do also think there's an element of it's been so good for so long that it's like how long can you talk about the good? Like you almost need to find problems. People are inventing problems, I think, because we have it so good. Like they don't have real problems anymore.
Well, and I think I mentioned that once before too. It's like these people in Hollywood who are just ridiculously gorgeous, and they get they get to these big roles in movies where they get paid millions of dollars, and people fawn over them, and magazines and websites putting their images everywhere. And they just think that, life is an accident, like things just sort of happen this way. It's like you are an absolute lottery winner in terms of like your looks and the ability to mutter a few phrases while making everyone blink their eyes, like, because you're a dreamboat. But like, get over it. Like, that's not normal, okay? And, normal life, it isn't like this. And if you treat it like that, then people just think, well, I don't know, like, we should let anyone into this country who wants to come in. It's like, well, we still have a responsibility to the citizens that are here and the people who need to be able to try to find a job, but I feel like so many people in our country don't have enough pride of place. They don't have enough understanding of what it means to be, members of a community. That's one of the things I really actually enjoyed about Trump. It wasn't just like, what do we do about the workers? What do we do about them or this or that? It's like, these are our workers. These are our, firefighters. These are our police officers. This is who we are. And we need to make sure we're taking care of each other. How can we have solidarity if we don't do that? And stop pretending like life is just a chance, like, no.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is recovering our history and our understanding of the past. And something else with the Hollywood stars, that they seem to think that we just sprout out of nowhere. But they're all the product of hundreds of years of people fighting and dying for freedom and for a country where you can work hard and get ahead. And I think that, there's the George Orwell, I think he said, those who control the past control the present. And making sure that we are not allowing people who have no sense of pride of place, pride of our history, to control the narratives of the past and control how kids are learning their history or not learning their history, because it's important that we remember our stories to regain that pride of place.
Yeah. Every society needs heroes. Every society needs founders.
And needs a history. Yeah.
Talk all about Rome is always a prime example
Every
of that.
generation puts the hero on the pop charts.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, also, we'd be completely remiss during 4th of July. We have the privilege of sitting in this room, recording this podcast, doing what we do now because our fellow Americans, past and present, laid down their lives, put their lives on the line so that we could have this freedom. So be totally remiss if we did not thank everyone who serves our country with our military, all the people who have family members who are veterans or have died, or if you yourself are a veteran or know someone in your family has died. We can't thank you enough for your sacrifice that you have willingly taken on, or if you were drafted in order for us to be where we are now.
Well, and their families too. I mean, the families.
Yeah, and the family sacrifice as well. Yeah. I mean, the bravery required in that is, it just gives me chills, like thinking about some of the early patriots who took on the British, or people who died in World War II or World War I. I mean, just willingly sending the sons overseas, especially in World War II, understanding like we're sending our sons overseas because we need to do what's right, and we're willing to sacrifice our sons. It's hard to even think about that. And that's why I think whenever war gets brought up today, and Josh is rightfully very critical of a lot of war hawks, the things to send your sons to potentially die over is just, there's so few things that actually are worth doing that for. We really need to be very conscious about why. That's why whenever I always want to make clear too, because we definitely are critical of like military industrial complex and policies that are happening in our military right now. Of course, that's not an indictment upon actual people who are serving to protect us, but we of course want to make sure that we're doing the right things. We're doing right by the people that make that sacrifice. So thank you so much to everyone. And I think that about rounds us out for this episode. Josh, thank you for giving us your brain for this hour.
Thanks, Josh.
Erica, thank you for keeping it fresh. And we hope you enjoy your 4th of July. We know we will be as well during this episode. Hopefully we're out on the lake somewhere with loved ones, and really appreciate all of you. Love living in this country, and we will see you on the next one. See you guys next Thursday.